Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rachel Kangas, and I work with the Florida Public Archaeology Network in our Southwest region. And today I am super excited because we have another fantastic guest speaker. We have Jennifer Blanks, aka the Cemetery Sista, who is here to talk to us about threats that face Black cemeteries in Florida and what we can do to help. So Jennifer Blanks runs the Instagram page called the Cemetery Sista, which is absolutely fantastic. Check it out. And the whole purpose of that page is filling in the gaps of Black history through preserving and protecting Black cemeteries. So I am very, very excited that she has come on today to talk to us about this really important issue that I've been talking about. We've done the Black Cemetery Bill update in the Florida legislature, and we've been talking about cemeteries, for the last year. So I'm really excited to have an expert here to talk about this. So Jennifer Blanks is a Black woman who was born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana. She is an alumna of the Jackson State University and is currently pursuing a PhD in urban and regional sciences at Texas A&M University. Her dissertation rests at the intersection of disaster management and preservation planning for historic Black cemeteries throughout Texas and surrounding states. She is a proud research team member for the Texas Freedom Colonies Project, founded by Dr. Andrea Roberts, and is also a proud fellow of the Bill Anderson Fund. So without further ado, I will have Jennifer come on and have our presentation.
Hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm really excited to be here and talk about threats that Black cemeteries face and how this can impact their preservation efforts and the longevity of them. So I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll jump right into the presentation. So as Rachel says, the purpose of the Cemetery Sista is to fill in the gaps of Black history through the preservation and protection of Black cemeteries. And so just to again kind of provide quick background about myself, I am currently pursuing a PhD at Texas A&M in urban and regional science. However, my background is environmental science. So there's a lot of overlap there, surprisingly. Again, born and raised in New Orleans, Louisiana, and my overall research interests are environmental justice, environmental planning, disaster research, preservation planning, and then cemetery management. And so I want to explain like the three main objectives of the Cemetery Sista and where it is right now, and just kind of start to shape it as I move on with my career as a scholar. And so the first goal is to increase awareness on issues impacting Black cemetery preservation. And I have to emphasize, like, there are specific issues that impact Black cemeteries, and I will get into that later, but the whole point of the Cemetery Sista is to start these conversations and really think of different ways that we can address these issues that are innovative and really uplift the community that these cemeteries rest in and promote some cultural and heritage integrity within those spaces. And then the second goal is to highlight resources that support cemetery maintenance. Cemeteries are extremely expensive to maintain. Through my research, I'm finding that one of the most expensive costs is just mowing the lawn of a burial ground, which was a surprise to me because I'm from Louisiana. We have a lot of ornamental monuments. As you can see here, this is my my paternal grandparents' mausoleum. And so I would assume that these are pretty expensive to maintain. And while they are, it was just really alarming to me that mowing the lawn is pretty expensive in a burial ground. And then thirdly, is to innovate best practices and tools to facilitate community engagement of cemetery preservation. One goal in my dissertation research and of the Texas Freedom Colonies Project is to center the voices and stories and narratives of the community members and descendants of Texas Freedom Colonies. And so it's really important to have that kind of cultural competence embedded in this research, especially if it's a community that I am not familiar with. And so that segues perfectly into my main points for wanting to preserve cemeteries, and particularly Black cemeteries. So like when there is a lot of cultural influence to be found in burial grounds, and this can vary depending on the geography, the landscape, the historical culture. This can impact the style of the burial ground. And so in Florida, there are a lot of above ground burial grounds because it is a coastal state. It typically has a lot of water from hurricanes or just flooding in general. And so that's one burial style. And then another, like I said, in New Orleans, we have a lot of above ground burials as well. But then this is also a chance to reform education in our school systems across all levels, grade school, high school, college, because if we fail to protect these cemeteries, it erases important historical information, but also genealogical information. And it's actually quite difficult for African Americans to trace their genealogy due to enslavement, the history of enslavement and destruction of records and the whole census counting and how Black populations were counted. And so cemeteries, they're evidence to trace genealogy, but then they also can tell you a lot about the community. They can tell you who is interned in the burial ground, the ages of those interned, so you can kind of track if a sudden event happened would cause the death in those cemeteries. So it could be influenza, for example, or a modern example today would be COVID-19. So we can see an influx 20 years from now, 50 years from now, even 100 years from now. When we're not here, but the cemeteries are there. Someone who is analyzing a burial ground can get all of this information just from the cemetery. And the point of working with community members connects to storytelling because there is value in oral tradition and intangible heritage and what's embedded in the memories of elders in these communities. Because again, like you can learn a lot of information from cemeteries, but it's the surrounding communities and descendants who have loved ones interned in these burial grounds. They'll have stories and documents such as newspapers, clippings, yearbooks from their high school, all kinds of information to really paint a beautiful picture of the people that are interned in these burial grounds. And so that leads me to the risks that African American cemeteries face. So broadly speaking, cemeteries need to be properly maintained. They need to have safe security and accessibility, be free of hazards. But as minorities, African Americans, we suffer from inequalities and other issues that most races or other cemeteries will not endure. And so these are just like common themes that I have found through my dissertation research so far. And it's in no particular order. So infrequent maintenance is one issue. Without infrequent maintenance, you'll have overgrown vegetation. It makes it difficult for the cemetery to be accessible. And it's just not aesthetically pleasing. I know where I'm from in Uptown New Orleans, we take pride in our neighborhood, we take pride in where we're from, and the cemetery should be reflective of that because when we go and visit our loved ones, we want to enjoy the space because after all, cemeteries are parks, right? And that's where people would go and have picnics and celebrations and, just honor life. And infrequent maintenance just makes it more difficult to really view this space as something that is to be enjoyed. Suburban sprawl, as you know, in Florida, with Zion Cemetery here in this picture, suburban sprawl and urban development, and due to, sorry to say it, but negligent urban planners who pass policies and approve buildings and construction projects that destroy cemeteries can greatly impact the preservation of a cemetery. And because if the cemetery is destroyed, if all of the headstones are destroyed, if bodies are haphazardly exhumed and disposed of, there's nothing left to preserve at that point, and it's just kind of a crisis. Cemetery abandonment typically can happen because of migration patterns. Communities typically move away to locate more resources to support themselves. However, this can greatly impact cemeteries. And where my dissertation is in Texas, DP, Texas, populations tend to move away because they are in rural areas of Texas, and so they are obviously relocating to find more resources, whether it be financial, education, just basic survival needs. So healthcare, grocery stores, things like that. Burial ground security is an issue, and it kind of ties into desecration and vandalism. So Black cemeteries have a history of being targeted for racial violence, as you can see here in this picture. This is from a burial ground in, I want to say it was in Tyler, Texas. It's a Black burial ground. And so burial ground vandalism can range from just spray painting to the destruction of headstones to just very disturbing desecration where bodies are removed from their burial site. They're actually stolen. There's a history of medical colleges, Harvard University, Yale University, and their history of grave robbing Black cemeteries to advance medical science. So one story that I like to tell people about, security, burial ground security in Black cemeteries, when these Black bodies were being exhumed, illegally stolen from their interments, they would be shipped. So sure, the universities would have these bodies exhumed. However, they would also be shipped via the trail system, the trainway system. And to transport the decomposing bodies, they would be stuffed in a barrel full of whiskey. And so once the body made it to its destination, the body would be sold, but the remaining whiskey would also be sold. And that is where rot gut whiskey comes from. And if you're not familiar with rot gut whiskey, it is bottom shelf whiskey. So that was one fun fact that I found, one fun disturbing fact that I found while doing my research. So that's just very extreme example of how Black cemetery desecration manifests and evolved over time. Accessibility is another issue. In Texas, we have a lot of land ownership concerns surrounding Black burial grounds, whether it be the cemetery was abandoned, but it's abandoned within a secure fence and nobody has access to remove the locks on the burial ground. Land ownership is an issue. With the freedom colonies, sometimes we've seen where a cemetery is located on private property and it's inaccessible and the owners are reluctant to allow descendants to visit the burial grounds, although it's illegal to deny a person access to a burial ground in the state of Texas, especially if it's on private property. Then there's also poor infrastructure. So in Houston, Texas, there were a lot of cemeteries that experienced flooding following Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And it's because they're located in floodplains and they like poor drainage. And so this can cause an issue. Livestock grazing, again, a local cemetery here in Texas. There is evidence of pigs and cows grazing on top of the burial ground. And then just policies in general. So in a lot of Jim Crow states historically, there are burial grounds where it's embedded in the cemeteries, bylaws that the cemetery has to be segregated. And if not that, the cemetery can deny the interment of a person of color. And so this is just a really extensive list. It's definitely not the entire list of risks that African-American cemeteries face. But like I said, these are like the main ones that I noticed in my notes while doing my dissertation. And I want to spend a particular amount of time talking about natural disasters and cemeteries as well, because this is an intersection in my dissertation. And so cemeteries are grossly overlooked in disaster management plans. In 2005, when Hurricane Katrina impacted Hurricane New Orleans, it also totally destroyed and displaced a lot of burials in the cemeteries in New Orleans and just south of New Orleans, especially in St. Bernard Parish. One of the hardest hit cemeteries was Merrick Cemetery, and it's in Violet, Louisiana. That's a predominantly Black neighborhood in St. Bernard Parish. And all of the burials, all the interments were displaced from that storm. And I believe it took about 5 to 6 months to re-identify the individuals, notify their families, and then reinterm them in the proper burial place. And it was such a crisis and just very disturbing, and one of the most traumatizing things I remember seeing on the news from Hurricane Katrina. And fast forward to today, as a scholar, I'm interested in learning like what kind of policies can be developed to prevent something like that. What is the protocol in place? FEMA does have resources to help cemeteries prepare for natural disasters and respond. However, it's deeply vetted, and I believe this kind of information needs to be readily available for all cemeteries, not even just Black cemeteries, but all cemeteries in general, because I cannot imagine getting a phone call that my loved one was exhumed because the flood waters opened their mausoleum, and now we have to go through this reinterment process. So that's really traumatizing. And I'm talking a lot about flooding, but natural disasters of any kind can impact cemeteries. So it can be wildfires. I know that's definitely an issue in California and Washington area, Arizona, where they're known to have wildfires, and the high heat can damage the granite on the headstone and any ornamental objects like that in the cemetery. Tornadoes and high winds can uproot trees in cemeteries and cause significant damage with the burial spots. And also, again, can kind of just can damage the ornaments in the cemetery. Can knock down power lines and just make it really an unsafe place to visit. However, there is resources available for this. The Chikora Foundation, they have a disaster management and preparedness kind of document to really help explain like the response and recovery that's needed for disaster management with cemeteries. And so then that leads me into like tips that you can practice to help preserve your cemetery. Because there are a lot of issues with preserving cemeteries in general, but there are 5 tips that you can do. And so like one, obviously, is to volunteer your time and help clean your local cemetery. I don't know a cemetery that turns away any help. There's always something to do. And again, like routine maintenance really helps preserve the integrity of the place of the cemetery. And so just volunteering your time like once a month or every weekend or during Veterans Day, where they do a lot of cemetery cleanup for veterans and put flowers on their burial places. That's a really good way to help. Document your cemetery visits with pictures. I always do this when I go to the cemetery, even when I visit my grandparents' cemetery. Every time I go, I always take a picture, even if I have like 5 copies of this picture from 5 different visits. It's just really important because landscapes can change so much, especially in areas that experience a lot of natural disasters. I just like to keep the personal record for myself. And then contacting your state historic preservation office. They typically have a lot of resources to help maintain the cemetery, to help get your cemetery on the state's historic preservation list. And although it's good to have those kinds of accolades and documents, it still doesn't legally protect your cemetery. And so you really want to contact that state historic preservation office to get to learn what legal support you have with your cemetery. And then schedule cemetery events. So just down the road in Waco, Texas, once a year, they'll do this weekend where the entire community will come out and basically have like, I don't want to say a festival, but it's basically like a giant cemetery cleanup where they're doing like a cemetery scavenger hunt with the kids that are visiting. They're cleaning the headstones for veterans who are interned in the cemetery. So it's kind of like a neighborhood block party centered in the cemetery, and it just brings a lot of traffic to the cemetery, raises a lot of awareness on cemetery preservation in the area. But then also educate others the importance of cemeteries. So prior to this, I didn't think I would be interested in doing cemeteries. I actually never considered that because my background is environmental science. But I was brought into it through my advisor, Dr. Andrea Roberts, and through this, I've been able to appreciate cemeteries more than I've already did, considering my cultural background. If you're not familiar, in New Orleans, we spend a lot of time in our burial grounds. We have a lot of celebration in our cemeteries with the jazz funerals and second line bands. And so it wasn't really taboo for me to want to do this kind of research. But since starting this research, I have a deeper appreciation for burial grounds and just understanding that, you don't need to go to a cemetery the day that you're interning someone and that's the last time you go. Like I said in the beginning of my presentation, cemeteries are spaces where you're to go and honor your loved ones. You can go and have a good time and really just changing the narrative that cemeteries do not have to be this dark place. And then since you guys are in Florida, I wanted to plug in the Cemetery Resource Protection Training Program, which I think is really cool. And so it's the workshop that focuses on cemetery care and preservation. Volunteers are able to explore cemeteries as historical resources, but also learning the laws and legislation that protect them, how to groom and maintain headstones and burial markers, and just overall cemetery landscape maintenance in general. And so that is all of my tips, and that is my presentation. And so you can follow me on Instagram at the Cemetery Sista. I'm on Twitter at Cemetery Sista, and my Gmail is the cemeterysista@gmail.com. Thank you.
Oh, that was so awesome. Thank you so much. So anyone watching, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the comment section, and I will make sure to relay those to Jennifer. Let's see, we have Chris Nolan, who is our local cemetery super volunteer in Florida. She said taking pictures is definitely useful. Yes, absolutely. She's monitored quite a few cemeteries, dozens of cemeteries for us using pictures in a form. So yeah, absolutely. And I saw a lot of likes and loves show up while you were talking about how to document cemeteries and good ways to do that. So I have a question for you.
Sure.
So you talk a lot about, disaster management. Well, first of all, thank you for all of this information. This is all fantastic. Also, this is my cat, Charlotte. She loves to help with archaeology. She's really into it. So you talked about such great information, and I had a question. We get a lot of questions for people who are, enjoy. Sorry, Charlotte muted me. So is there a good way for people who manage cemeteries to prepare for like weather disasters? Are there any tips you have for that?
Yeah, so definitely just like quick tips that I can think of or can recall is to like secure any loose objects, any loose ornaments. Make sure that you have at least 3 people who you can contact, other like not including yourself, to help secure the burial grounds and then respond to the burial ground in the event something major happens, like a power line comes down. Keep a list of all of your insurance documents. So any emergency contacts. So maybe you have drainage in your cemetery, but now it's like readily flooding and getting clogged. So like, who is your connection at the local level, as your local municipal, that you can call? So definitely having that emergency contact list. Basically securing the burial ground, so kind of locking it and making it secure and accessible during the disaster, just because it can be vulnerable in that state, because people are leaving. So I hate to say this, but it happens, so I have to say it. So like if a criminal is thinking, okay, I'm gonna go in this burial ground and like desecrate it, or I want to steal something, steal an object, you don't want that to happen because nobody is there, because everybody is fleeing the disaster. So making sure the burial ground is safe and secure in that way. But then also just like routine maintenance for hazards that exist. So just keeping a list of those issues, and then making an effort to gradually check those things off the list, and making sure that like the infrastructure of the burial ground is pretty up to date prior to the disaster. So those are some tips I could think off my head.
Yeah, those are awesome. And yeah, we get, like I said, we get questions about that all the time. And yeah, we're trying, to help people move from like, oh my gosh, there was a hurricane and now these things are happening in the cemetery, to like, okay, what things might happen and how can we prepare for that? So that's awesome.
I have a really good resource that I'm happy to email and share with you.
Please do. I will have, and I'll post the link in the comments.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then kind of a follow-up to that, what are some ways that people can respond after a hurricane or some other disaster? I had we've been doing cemetery conferences and things like that through FPAN and through our crypt workshops. And I remember some great advice was, if you have damage in the cemetery, put blue tarps over it so that when FEMA does their flyovers, they count those as like blue tarps for damage. Do you have any other post-disaster things that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, so definitely the tarp is a really good idea. Maybe if they're like, again, like down power lines is a really popular one, so I can't talk about it enough. But definitely like securing that barrier, so not allowing anybody to go that way. Calling, so like in Louisiana, we have Entergy who would handle our down power lines, so contacting those individuals. Honestly, recruiting volunteers. I know in like Louisiana, and it might be similar in Florida because you guys experience a lot of flooding and natural disasters. One of the first places that people will go to after checking their house, they will check the cemetery. And so there's always a lot of like community engagement, or like a lot of volunteers who are using their own resources to kind of clear the way to the cemetery, remove any down debris in the cemetery. So definitely recruiting volunteers, or coordinating cleanup efforts, and really encouraging the community members to come in there. Oh, one thing I failed to mention is very important to like prepare, but then also have like post disaster, have a copy of your burial records. Like have a digital copy of your burial records, even if I don't even think it should be, I guess, like in an ideal world, like with GIS and everything now, and using like maps to lay out the burial ground. But even if you have like a paper copy of your burial grounds, you should at least digitize that and make copies for all of the employees or the stewards of the cemetery, and just kind of check through the burials, maybe make a mark prior to the disaster, and then post disaster do the same thing, follow up. Maybe a condition has changed, maybe a headstone was toppled here, or there's a pool of water pooling over this interment over there. So definitely like going through the burial ground with the burial records. I can't believe I forgot that. That's
so good.
That's so important.
You got it in there. That's such a good one.
It's so important.
Yeah, and we have, situations all the time where we lose, burial records are lost. And then if those burials are unmarked or something happens to the marker, then it's like a whole event to try and relocate.
Yeah. So. Yeah, because now I need forensic analysis, and that's expensive.
Yep. And we have, I made a video a few weeks ago about how to list a cemetery on the state's official list. So I can repost that in the comments. And that would be another place to store those digital copies, is have a copy with the Florida Master Site file. So let's see, another question. How can local governments address policy issues? And are there any main issues that you see that are affecting cemeteries?
I guess the obvious one that's in the news is like, oh, we found a Black cemetery underneath a church, or under a parking lot, or anywhere other than in a cemetery, like, or a landscape, and is designated as a cemetery. And so I think that's like the most obvious one that's occurring right now, just across several states, so not even just Florida or Texas. But in Louisiana, where they're dealing with expansions of chemical oil plants, and I recently published a paper on that, so I will have to plug that in with you guys. So you have all of these threats to cemeteries, but they really come down to land use policies at their local municipal, and how is the land being designated? How is it being protected? What does it look like in those comprehensive plans? And without that basic document supporting and showing these spaces as cemeteries and places that should be protected, it really makes them vulnerable to all of these different development hazards. And so I think that's like the big question in my dissertation, like what kind of policies would I recommend, and what can they do? And really it's the start is really for them to review what is in their bylaws, like what is the local, like what is the law on protecting cemeteries, how is it protected in the face of urban development, like in Texas, if a cemetery is designated a cemetery, it cannot be used for anything other than a cemetery unless it's professionally removed and relocated elsewhere. But we know that's not the case because we have descendants from freedom colonies telling us all the time, I can't access my great grandparents' burial ground because it is on private property and it's behind a locked gate. So I think really the first step is for a lot of local municipals to do an internal review. And then for private cemeteries, they can do that internal review as well and kind of see what is in their cemetery bylaws, just to ensure that there is nothing racist in their policies. So I think that's really the first step.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that's really fantastic advice. And you mentioned that in Texas, it is illegal for a landowner to not allow descendants onto their property to access the cemetery. And that is the same in Florida. So it doesn't mean that the descendants have open access to the property, but they have to make, I think it's reasonable accommodations.
Right,
So
right.
that is
Yeah.
the same in Florida. Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Thank you. So, and again, if anybody else has questions or anything like that, put them in the comments and I'll ask one more. So just generally, if someone is interested in cemeteries, if they're watching this and they're like, oh, I really like just walking around in cemeteries and checking them out. And oh, there's like a whole lot more going on here than I realized. Do you have any suggestions for how they could get involved in caring for those cemeteries and things like that in responsible ways?
Yeah, definitely. Contact the owner of the cemetery or identify who the cemetery stewards are and see if they would be interested in allowing you to volunteer, maybe even hire you if you really love it that much that you want to be paid to do that kind of work. As a student, as a scholar, I'm thinking education. So definitely like incorporating cemetery visits in your classroom curriculums, really like instilling the importance of cemetery preservation in younger students. And again, like really taking the taboo out of cemeteries and them not being these terrible places that are sad. I mean, yeah, a lot of people or some people may not go to cemetery because they did lose their loved one and, you know, it was traumatizing for them. But I think that's the point of education. You can kind of, or at least for me, I want to change that narrative and kind of reshape how people think about cemeteries. So definitely volunteering. Like I said, I don't know any cemetery that refuses help. I've seen some really cool ways that people engage with cemeteries. They'll do like photo contests. So so like in Louisiana, they'll have the historic preservation picture of the month, and it's always like some really huge mausoleum in rural Louisiana that looks beautiful. So like that's one way, having photo contests. Scavenger hunts are another really cool thing that a lot of people do. And if you're visiting from another community, definitely make friends with the cemetery stewards, and then they'll hopefully gateway you into meeting other people who can tell you more information about it and more about the community that once existed around that cemetery and the people who are interned there. So this is really cool. It's like a live history project or like a live history book.
That's so
Physical
cool.
history book in a different context.
Oh, that's such a good way to think about it. We always say that they're like outdoor museums, but I like the physical history book too. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us here.
No problem.
I really appreciate it. So everyone, I'll post this on our Facebook. Jennifer has kindly said that we can keep this up, so this video will stay up. If you ever have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comment section and I will let Jennifer know. And same thing if you're watching on Instagram, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in there. So with that, we can go ahead and end it. I'll be back next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern with another Facebook Live. And Jennifer Blanks, thank you so much. Everybody make sure that you follow her at the Cemetery Sista on Instagram. And I can't wait to see what's next for your publications and your dissertation and everything. So
thank you, Rachel.
so much. Absolutely.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. So have a great day. Bye, everybody.